or units, whatever they choose. But I want us all to understand the rules of the road here. In order to say all we want to say, we're going to have to follow some very strict time limits. And each of the panelists has been advised that after he introduces himself, he then has 5 minutes to say whatever he wants to say. But at the end of 5 minutes, I'm going to hit him on the knees and make him sit down. Because we're going to defer all the questions until all the presentations have been made. And then you can ask whatever you want. If they can't answer the question, I'll make up an answer and give it to you. So I want you to pay attention to what they have to say. Now let me tell you. Some of you have heard me say over the last couple of days that hundreds of books, magazine articles have been written about the Iwo Jima experience. That's wonderful. You know, a lot of those writers are rewriting what they've read. They weren't there. They don't know anything about it, but they keep reading and they keep rewriting. That's fine. You know what all those stories about? These guys and the fellows they represent of all services who served on that iconic battle on Iwo Jima. All right, without wasting time, Don Mates, you are first, please. Introduce yourself, and then you got 5 minutes. I'll watch it for you.
Okay.
Stand up, Bill.
In July 1943, a recruiter came to John Hay High School, and he said, "You're going to turn 18. Instead of being drafted, why don't you sign up with the Marines?" And the first thing I asked him was, "Will I get a dress blue uniform?" He said, "We only issue dress blue uniforms to the band, to the drum and bugle corps, seagoing Marines, and embassy guards." Well, I told him I got seasick. I don't play an instrument. Could I become an embassy guard? And he said, "Well, you're 6'2", you're in shape. Got a good chance. Should I put that down as your first choice?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "When will I get my, will I get a red stripe?" He says, "Oh, when you graduate from embassy school," he said, "you'll be a corporal and you'll get your red stripe." Well, I want you to know, to this day, I'm looking for that recruiter. I went through boot camp at Paris Island. Paris Island, I went to Camp Lejeune. There I went to a fancy sounding school called Combat Intelligence School, which just boiled down to a scout observer. From there I went to Norfolk. From Norfolk, took a boat to Cuba, and got Liberty in Panama, and ended up in a replacement depot in Hawaii. I thought, my God, this is marvelous. I was then shipped by a baby carrier to Guam. We had invaded Guam on July 24th, and I joined a week later as a replacement. When we arrived on Guam, I was assigned to the 3rd Reconnaissance Company. The 4th Platoon was spun off and assigned to General Graves Erskine. General Erskine didn't want, when he wanted an answer quick, he didn't want it to come up through the chain of command. He wanted to send out his own men. What the Swiss Guard is to the Pope, the 4th Platoon of the 3rd Reconnaissance Company was to General Erskine. General Erskine wanted to find out where the spigot mortars were coming from. Spigot mortar is bigger than a 55-pound oil drum. Doesn't have much shrapnel, but has a hell of a concussion. The Japanese set it up on railway ties, shot him into our area, and one must have landed near him. He sent 8 of us out at nighttime to look for where the spigot mortars were coming. You could see them easier because they were rocket fed and the sparks. When the sparks burned out, it tumbled. I'm sure a lot of you fellows that are vets remember it. And you felt like the road runner in the cartoon that's looking up for the piano to drop on him, or the car run them over and flatten them out. Well, 8 of us went out, and I have to mention their names, because unfortunately that patrol was doomed, and I just want to remember them, and I want you to remember them. It was Corporal William Reed. He had been married and had 3 children, stationed in Puerto Rico. With him was Joe McCluskey, who to this day we're not sure if they found his body or not. We have somebody working on it. Next came Warren Nitzel, and he died of wounds. Warren Garrett, he was bayoneted to death. The corporal and McCluskey, the radio man, they were both killed by hand grenades. In my foxhole with me was a baseball pitcher from the Washington Senators. His name is Jimmy Trimble. Went to school at St. Albans, and he had signed with Clark Griffin and got a $5,000 contract. Was sent to Duke instead of a farm team by Griffin. Griffin paid his scholarship, paid his tuition, and Trimble jumped the gun, joined the Marines. I met him in Combat Intelligence School. We went to Guam together. We patrolled at Guam together. He was my tent mate, and Erskine was a baseball nut. He wanted to win the World Series among the 6 divisions that were out there in 1944. And Trimble, being the pitcher, we won the series. We became Erskine's guard. We were sent out on patrol. The Japanese out on patrol looking for the spigot mortars, and the Japanese caught us with our pants down near the sulfur mine and Moriyama village.
Hi.
Thank you.
Charles, yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is something new to me. I'm Charles Frazier, born and raised in Montgomery County, Maryland. My school is in Montgomery County. And upon graduating from school, right out of school, I went in the Marine Corps, but it wasn't on me. It was man at the state told me, he said, are you going to the Marine? I told him, no. I said, I have my Navy paper. He said, I can't say what he told me, but last word he said, throw them away because you were going in the Marine Corps. I said, well, thank you. I said, I wasn't prepared for that. So arrived at Malfa Point on the 24th of February. I said, well, this is it. So upon going up, after I arrived there, I said, I'd like to make the best of it. So I made the boot camp. Okay, so then I had my leave. When I went back, after leave, we were all prepared for go overseas. And in July, we were shipped to California. And from there, we went to Pearl Harbor. And stayed there until January, and we loaded up and we headed to invade Iwo Jima. And I say, this is really something for me. We're moving really fast. After a while, we stopped off at Guam, we got a break. From going to Iwo Jima, I arrived, we landed on the 22nd of February, where I was there until duration, when we secured. Upon leaving there, I was sent back to Hawaii. We stayed there from April until August, when we loaded up again, shipped out to head to invade Japan. When we got to Saipan, that's when they dropped the second bomb and the surrender, but we didn't stop. We still had to go on to Japan, where we went, helped us to clean up. And we landed in Sasebo, the where I stayed from September until the 1st of January, and the ship is back to Guam, and that's where I stayed until time they said I could rotate back to the States to get out. And when I heard that word, I guess I jumped up that high. But the good news, so from then on, it just couldn't say that's about all of what I had to say.
All right, let me go back to that. You're up.
I'm Wilson Howard. I was in the Navy, not the Navy that you think about, aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers. I was in the amphibious part of it, which is landing craft, LSTs, LCTs, Higgins boats, and such. LCT, we were loaded on an LST in Hawaii, well, Pearl Harbor, and then taken to a place called Iwo Jima, and we were dumped there. That means we slid off the side of the LST deck, and then we were on our own. Sound bites about Iwo. Why did they come in on the east instead of the west side? The west side had a better beach. The only difficulty was after you got on the beach about 100 feet, there was a sharp incline, maybe 40, 50, maybe 60 feet high. Only about 2 roads came down. So that would have been very restrictive. The Marines who landed would have been there as targets. On the east side, there was a small, if you want to call it, beach, maybe 15 or 20 feet. The next incline was about 12 to 15 feet. And that was all that was volcanic ash, not sand. Speaking of volcanic, that island has risen some 45 feet since 1945. So the beach that these Marines hit is not the beach that's there now. Interesting enough, if you think about it, the whole island coming up 45 feet. No docks. Everything that came into the island had to come in by amphibious craft. That meant the Marines, God bless them all the supplies, ammunition, tanks, trucks, jeeps, everything. Yeah, whiskey for the officers' club. Not all of it got in, by the way. Uniforms, lumber, everything that you can imagine to start building a community there on the island. Beach conditions. Very high seas. It's almost impossible with a small craft such as what I was on, 130 feet long and about 30 or 45 feet wide, flat bottom with a ramp at the forward end, if you want to call it that, bow, and on the rear or aft end was a huge anchor, which you dropped as you came into the beach. It would help you pull off the beach if you got stuck. And we did on occasions because of the tide. We lost a couple of men. One of them, not on this craft that I was on, the crew was about 20 men. But we were alongside another LCT when we took machine gun fire. And one of the seamen on the other craft beside us decided that the best place for him to be was up in the so-called conning tower. As he was going up, machine gun fire got him, and that was the end of his life. The next fellow and another one alongside us got hit by indirect fire. I don't know whether it was a mortar or a frag bomb or what, but whatever it was, hit the LCT beside us. And I happened to be watching him, he was a friend of mine, took off his head. How did we, you know, once you land with all that ammunition on, 100, maybe 150 tons of ammo, had to be unloaded. The Navy did not take that responsibility. It was either the Marines or the Army men, and it was small boxes that the 30 caliber, 50 caliber was in. Had to be unloaded by hand. So that took a lot of time. And so I had free time to go up on the island. Curiosity probably would have gotten me shot otherwise, but I took in all things. I went to the top of Surabaya 2 days after the flag was raised, the big flag. I got told by a Marine private what to do in no uncertain language about getting your derriere, and he didn't say derriere, off that mountain. In the mountain, it's just a small hill, 550 feet high. That's not a mountain, that's a hill. But it was a mountain compared to what the island was, because it was all flat, essentially flat. I was there on the landing strip when the first 29 landed. And yes, it came in from the south end and landed toward the north end of that short strip, which was dirt. And then the minute that they got to the end of the thing, the submarine yelled up to the captain of the, or whoever was flying the 29, you better get yourself back down the other end of the runway because you're going to be subject to small iron fire. Biggest ship I'd ever seen. I'd never seen one that large. Anyway, he turned around and went back to the end of the south end of the runway. They repaired the ship and it took off later that day. I'm getting a touch in the back, which means shut up. Talking about CBs a minute. I talked to one of the Japanese prisoners we took back one evening. It was after dark because on the open deck they were afraid the Japanese might shoot their own men to keep them from going back and surrendering. We had about 25 on there. And I spoke to one of the men. Some of them spoke English. And I said something about why didn't the Japanese build a road at the top of that mountain, Surabaya? He said that, of course, it had been their homeland for centuries, and they'd never even thought of building a road. The Seabees built the road to the top of Surabaya in about 2 or 3 days with bulldozers. So it just shows you that the Japanese had a different thought in mind. They were in the island, as they said, not on the island. Well, second hand back in the back here, so I guess that means shut up. So I'm shutting up. Thank you.
You're lucky. You're about to get a third hand and a blow on your knees. But that's okay. Thank you.
Name was O'Malley Walker. Earlier today, it felt like come up to me and says, will you answer some questions on a panel? I said, sure. I didn't know I was supposed to say something up here. Briefly, I'll tell you how and why I was in the Marine Corps. I was a senior in high school in Clinton, Massachusetts, and there was a V-12 program. They're looking for officers candidates. So if you took tests, pass it, they put you in college. Went home and told my mother at 17 years old that she had to sign the papers. So she says, I don't want you in the Marine Corps. I says, Ma, the war will be over. Before we get out, we're going to be up in Dartmouth for 16 months. Well, I was up there about 6 weeks, met a couple more Irishmen. And they says, if we stay here, this war is going to pass us by. She said, we're flunking out on purpose. So that's how I got in the Marine Corps and got in a rifle company. Get in the E Company, 27th Marines. And in Pendleton, this is after we left the Raider camp. And we're on bivouac, and I overheard the platoon sergeant talking with the platoon leader. organizing the platoon, and they said, well, we'll make O'Malley a runner. I said, no way, I don't want to be a runner. You know, you run a speed hike or something, you rest. The runners don't rest. They're going back and forth. So the next day I says to Levines, our platoon sergeant, I says, Sarge, I understand we're getting BARs in soon. He says, yeah. I says, I want them. He says, you're crazy. He says, you know, they weigh 20 pounds. I said, no problem. And I just talked to the general earlier on the BAR. Those of you that aren't familiar with it, it has a forearm grip that's very uncomfortable. It's about yay wide. So when we were going over on the APA, we left Pearl Harbor. We transferred from the LSTs to the APAs. There was a CB contingent on board that APA. So I went to their workshop there, and I asked them if they couldn't put a grip, I call it a pistol grip, like they have on the Thompson submachine gun, if they could put that on that forearm. He said, leave the weapon overnight. And the next day, they had that pistol grip affixed, and that was great, being able to handle it, because I never used a bipod, they're too heavy. When the man talking to Freebius were talking about Iwo and going in onto the beach, they told us we went off the alligators, and they said they'd take us in, I'm going to guess 100, 150 yards, I'm not sure. But I was in the first wave, and when we got there, well, those mounds, I think, were as high as from roof to ceiling, and no way could those tractors negotiate. I don't think we were in there 10 feet. They said, get out. And we had to go up over the side. Well, we were coming in, my squad leader, Joe Wiggins, who had been on Bougainville and Choiseul, Velo Valley, paratrooper. I was joking around, kidding around, you know, not worried about anything. With all that bombing and napalm, artillery, nobody could be living there. It'd be a picnic. Wiggins turns to me, he says, O'Malley, you get in there, you're going to mess your pants. So we're in there about, you know, maybe 100 yards or so. We're getting way pinned down pretty good. And I turns to my assistant barman, and I says, well, I haven't messed my pants yet. He says, well, I have. But that's about my experience with Iwo Jima. Thank you.
Evening, troops. Brian Scharf, originally from Chicago. A couple of us guys went, this is years ago, I know you're getting calluses on your buns, but we went down to the recruiting office, and I had a big birth certificate I'd been working on with some ink eradicator, trying to change it to make me 17. Didn't work out, he threw it off the counter, so my sister got married, and I speared about 6 or 7 baptismal certificates off the altar. And that way you could make it any age you wanted to. So I talked to Mom and Dad. I said, I won't be going overseas till I'm about 18 years old. Like hell, 3 months I was gone. Up Great Lakes, down in Norfolk, had the small boats down there. Was on about 4 different LSTs. We were in the amphibs. Shipping over, we had aft tracks and tanks on the deck, and we had a couple of coxes down there playing basketball. Some of the chains broke loose and crushed a couple of guys. Skipper calls me up and says, Rondo, I like the way you handle the boats. You want to be a coxswain? I says, oh, hell yeah, man. You know, 16 years old, I was going home. So we get into the islands there. I'm cutting a lot of this short. We get into the island and get the guys over the side, and that's took us a mile and a half, 2 miles to get into the beach. Kind of bouncing around a lot. We were in about 14 foot of water, somewhere around there, and we hit an structure the UDT didn't take out. It was underwater demolition team back there, and now there's seals. And bow door drops down. I go over the top of the wheel, smash open my sternum, and smash my nose on a big front, and most of the guys were screaming and hollering. I couldn't breathe, and I kept telling myself, I'm 16, there's no damn way I could be having a heart attack. but I couldn't breathe, you know, that was the tough part about it. So another Higgins boat pulled alongside of us, a bunch of the guys jumped in there. We got up on the beach and laid up there till probably 10:30 that night till the medics got a hold of you, brought you back in, taped you up, stitched up your horn, and stayed on ship for a couple of days, and then we pulled off and we were laying smoke screens out in the bay out there. And that's pretty much the story, guys. It's a long time ago, and it's an honor to be sharing this with all my brothers here. So I don't know what the hell Swabby's doing in here with all these jarheads, but it seemed to work out. After that, we went to Okinawa, and after that, the war was over. Skipper called me up and says, Rondo, he says, I'll send you home if you want. I know you're underage. He says, but you'll get a chance to see guys that live 10 lifetimes will never see. So we did the occupation of Nagasaki, Sasebo. We were in Hiroshima a couple weeks after he dropped the bomb. 30 years later, the croaker at the VA tells me, he says, Rondo, your thyroid's all screwed up. So maybe that's what's preserving me, you know, the radiation. But then after that, you run out and you check out the chicks for a couple of years running around. Got on the fire department back in Chicago, put 22 years in back there with old Jarhead McCarthy, and that's pretty much what it's all about. I had 5 good kids and a beautiful wife. So thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be here with you.
Well, I want to thank each of you for sharing some part of your experience. I'm sorry that I have to limit you, but if we're going to get everything around and give people a chance to ask questions, that's kind of important that we do it that way. Now, hi, thank you. It won't work, I knew. I would tell you that now the floor is open for you to ask, and you can direct your question if you'd like, or ask a question if you don't point at somebody. I will. Hold on just a minute. And these panelists can speak up if they want to contribute something, and I won't cut them off this time. So here we go, and I want to make sure, Shane, that whoever's got a question, he uses the microphone. I want everybody to understand all the questions so you understand why you get the answer that you get. All right, so we're ready to go? Where's the first one?
For Mr. Mates, what happened to Jimmy Trimble, the pitcher?
Say that again?
The pitcher that was mentioned by the first speaker for the Senators, what happened to him, if anything?
Is this on?
Yeah.
The Washington Senator pitcher that was in the foxhole or shell hole with me, a grenade came into the shell hole, broke both my legs, and I looked down at my crotch and it was a bloody mess. And Jimmy Trimble was hit by the grenade in his back. He was living, and I crawled out of the hole to help pull him out. Pulled myself out and put my hand in to pull him out, and a Japanese soldier jumped in, and he had, and you can see it at the museum, I almost fell over when I saw it. There was what they call grenade 99, and it looks like a baseball base. It has a magnet in each corner. Put it up against a tank, tried to stop the tank or blow it apart. Well, he had this wrapped around him, and he wrapped himself around Jimmy, and it has a delayed explosion. And he yanked it, put his arms back around, and it went off, and it blew out. The Japanese soldier evaporated, and Trimble was blown in half. That's what happened to the Major League Baseball pitcher.
Thank you very much. Where was the next question? Right here? Yeah, wait a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, right there. You'll be next. Go ahead.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to take this opportunity to stand and straighten the sharks.
Got your message. Okay.
I have a question for you. What unit were you with when you landed on Iwo, and what was your job? I thought you there.
Who you want to answer?
Yes, Dad.
Okay. Did you get the question? What was your unit? What was your job?
My job was when on Iwo was I was detached to the 5th Marines. Was we would supply. So our responsibility was to see that they got the supplies and stuff that they needed, and also we helped to take care of the wounded. That was the best part of the job. Also, you had to protect yourself. That was our main job.
What unit were you with?
I was with the 8th Ammo 5th Marine Division.
Thank you.
Well, I forgot something about up there when.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I received this, but it was 2 ladies from Congress spearheaded a drive for all black Marines that entered the Marine Corps before 1949. From 41 to 49 was all went to Mount Point. And they started a drive to all those that went into the Marine Corps at that time that they would get a gold medal. So they got it, and the president signed it. So on June the 13th, 2012, 400 some of the black Marines showed up at 8th and I to receive the medal. This is one. I'm one of the first black Marines that entered the all-white Marine Corps.
I got to tell you something about the beer. On the 9th or the 10th of after they had brought a crane on. I run a crane. I learned to run a crane in the CC camps for $19 a month. And when I went in, the gentleman back there, I know him from New York when we were kids, but I was raised in the coal mines. And we stole a whole, what do you call a net of beer. And guys in Eustis come to me one day and he says, well, how did we ever pick that out of the Higgins boat? Well, they got into it, and he was, we call him a 90-day wonder because he just got out of college and they gave him a lieutenant. And I said, you don't know nothing about picking that up. I had 60 foot of boom, and I couldn't ever get it up. And we had a guy come down with a truck. It wasn't at 10 or 12 days. They laid a matting down, and a guy by the name of Brown, Snuffy, he's 102 years old now in Indiana. But he engineered it. They had a tractor on the front, a little D2, and I told the guy, I says, put an asshole, excuse the French, in the cable, because I couldn't get it in the truck or on the boat. So he put a cable in there, and I picked it up, and it was Rainier Beer from Seattle. And they put it in and took it up by the airport, and they put a guy on there with a sub to watch it, because we were all 16 or 17 years old. And that's the first beer, but we stole it from the Marines. All this These guys come to me and said, I've been hunting you for a long time, it's Marines. I said, well, you got me now, better buy me one.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you. Where's the next question? While we're getting the next question identified, let me comment on a couple of things you heard this morning. Dick Camp gave a marvelous rundown about the campaign. Among other things, he pointed out that the underwater demolition teams carried cameras and they took photos of the beach. And then those photos were relayed back to the landing force. And I was a captain company commander, and I had my company on LST. And 3 days before the landing, an airdrop dropped an update intelligence report and photos of my beach, which was yellow too. It showed the beach was nice and level, but God had other ideas about that beach. 3 days later when I landed up against a 15-foot sandberg. 15 feet sandberg, caused entirely by the shifting tides, the surf, and the winds coming off the North of the Pacific. And no matter how quickly you took a picture and sent it, probably in 24 hours it's going to be different. And 3 days meant a difference in 15 feet. Now what's the difference? The difference was my tractor couldn't get it 15 feet to get over it. So halfway up the sandberg, at around the 10-foot mark, my tractor just spun around and ground to a halt and we stopped. We jumped out, I yelled, "Bail out!" We all jumped over the side. If you saw the museum in Quantico, the LVT didn't have any cover in those days. It was wide open in the well deck, and there was no ramp to exit. You just jumped over the side and hoped for the best. So I just want you to tell you that sometimes it made a good effort to give us the best information, but sometimes it changed so fast we didn't have it when we needed it. I want to add another little comment. Our intelligence was pretty good in an enormous number of ways. There were some ways how intelligence was a little bit lacking. For example, you heard Dick Camp say that originally the estimate was that the defenders numbered 12,000. As we got closer to it, the numbers went to 16. Then I got a number that says 18. When we finally landed, there were 22,000 defenders. And that made a difference. I remember very vividly, I read it time and time again, and after the war was over and until I gave the operation plan to the Commandant several years ago, intelligence said the soil on Iwo Jima will not be an impediment to troops or vehicles. What a lie. It's not intentional. That's the best they knew, but they didn't know the facts. And any Marine who landed on that black sand knows that you put a foot in it, it went up to your ankle as a minimum, and you pulled it out, you didn't know you'd been there. It was so full of black volcanic ash already. So the idea that it wasn't an impediment to vehicles and troops was absolutely wrong. The intelligence guys did the best they could with what they have, but sometimes it wasn't as good as it should have been. All right, who's got the next question? There you go.
Ron, how many of the men, the Marines that you were in your tractor got up on the beach, and what happened to the rest of them?
Most of the guys,
Come on up to the gate.
most of the guys were kind of drowning in there, and some of them were crawling over into the Higgins boat to pull alongside of us. Got up on the beach and the best you could. And I remember looking over the side. My horn was really bleeding a lot. The guy had glasses on. I was trying to reach him. He had his hands up and blood from my nose was going right out his glasses, you know. And I thought, Jesus, why can't I do something? But I couldn't breathe. But most of the guys, we had, I think it was 14, 15 guys we lost out of 36. But that's the odds it was. I don't know what else I can tell you.
Thank you.
I figure, like everybody else knows, we don't have to worry about hell because we've been there.
You know, as we talked about casualty figures, lots of horrific stories about casualties and the numbers of company commanders lost, battalion commanders killed. The experience in Iwo Jima did something for the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps had always drummed all of us in that when there's a need to step up and take a leadership role, do it. Don't wait for somebody to tell you, step up, take charge. It wouldn't have worked any better than it did on Iwo Jima. We ended up sometimes with privates first class, not only being squad leaders, but platoon leaders. We ended up with battalions commanded by very junior majors, because they're battalion commanders, KIA. That philosophy prevails today in the Corps, and we should be glad about that. A Marine doesn't run from responsibility, he runs to it. He wants to be in charge, and when the chips are down on the battlefield, that's an attitude that makes a difference. Who's got the question?
I just wanted to know how much training Marines had prior to making the landing. In other words, how long was boot camp in those days, and ITR, and how well were you prepared?
Yeah. I'll take a first swing at that, and then these panelists can speak up. The 4th Marine Division was the first American division of any service to sail directly from the port of embarkation and land in enemy territory. And that was the 4th Marine Division. We embarked from San Diego, and we sailed straight over to the combat in the Roy and Namur Islands. Now those islands were atoll islands, not very big, not tremendously heavily defended, but it was enough to give my troops and me an exposure to war, because we had men killed, we had men wounded badly. We learned that the Japanese were masters of camouflage. We learned that they were very good about hiding themselves in trees and being snipers and picking off our Marines. So it was a combat experience. From that we went to Saipan. Huge landmass by comparison with the atolls. We went then to Tinian, another landmass, not as big, but big. What that says is, when we in the 4th Division went to Iwo Jima, my company was about 90% combat veterans. And that made a difference. Now that's a downside. I landed with 231 men in Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines. 15 of those were replacements. Let's be fair. The replacements were not well trained. They were out of boot camp, a number of them just about weeks before they were put on ships and sent out. They had not been trained with us. We didn't know them. They didn't know us. They paid a high price for that. Other than the replacements, I think the units were well trained and prepared for what it had to do on Iwo Jima. Off the top of my head, I cannot go back and tell you about the length of boot camp or ITR and those things. That's give me time to sit down and figure it out in a private day, but I can't off the top of my head. But the fact is, we were combat veterans when we went to Iwo Jima, and I think that made a big difference in what we did. And I'm often asked, what was your attitude going in? Well, what's any Marine's attitude when he's going to go to war? We're going to go and do what we got to do. And we don't think in terms of what am I going to do if I'm being an individual defender. Think about that. We think what the objectives are. What is our objective when we get ashore? How do we get to it and do it? And I'm often asked, what was your most effective weapon on Iwo Jima? I've got a ready answer. They say, was it the flamethrower? Flamethrower tanks? Rockets? Machine guns? Naval gunfire? My answer is none of the above. My most effective weapon on Iwo Jima was the spirit, the training, the attitude, the bravery, the valor that rested in the heart and mind of our 18-year-old Marines. They knew what the mission was. We were there to accomplish that mission, and we would settle for nothing less. And that's why those young 18-year-olds, now represented by these folks, became the world's greatest generation. I was lucky as a company commander. I got a front row seat and watched these guys earn that reputation. But because they had the dedication, the bravery, and the personal valor that they did, there was no doubt about the outcome. That's my most effective weapon. Who's got it?
Guts.
Hi.
Guts. That's what we said, didn't we?
Say again?
Guts. We both said that. They had guts. That was the big thing. No fear.
Don't. Thank you very much. Here's the question.
This is kind of for all of you, but maybe Charles and Walter and especially Don. What did you know about the Japanese fighting man you were going up against? What had you been told about them in training and later on by your officers?
Well, the first thing, before I went in the Marine Corps, I was convinced that all Japanese were 5'2", wore glasses, were myopic, had buck teeth, were baby killers and rapists, and burned down people's homes. I was convinced that we would roll right over them, including me. And what I found out was they were first-class soldiers in a second-class army with third-class equipment, and they'd rather fight than run. When I was there, and when I left, only 200 had surrendered to the Marines. I was completely thrown off by the propaganda back home, the movies, the magazines, especially the movies. I see them today. They're a first-class joke. I was prepared psychologically, and I was prepared physically. It's the old story. They asked for 100 volunteers in the Marine Corps, and they say 98 of you are going to be casualties. And what you do is you look around for the other lucky fellow, because you're convinced nothing's going to happen to you. And I never, ever, either on Guam or on Iwo Jima, saw a Marine run. They did not flee. My outfit was that well trained, 3rd Marine Division. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to add a comment to that because lately I've been asked so many times. As you know, I'm a founder and the lead proponent for this joint memorial service that we have on Iwo Jima with the Japanese. And most times, well, many times, people say to me, how could you do that? How could you honor the Japanese? They try to kill you. I say, yeah, well, kind of even I'm trying to kill them too. So that was kind of even Steven. I can't worry about that. But I can tell you right now, and you can argue with me later if you want, but you're not going to change my mind, and I wouldn't expect yours. I have classmates of mine from 1942 who think damn Japanese is all one word. They don't want a Japanese car made in Nashville. They don't want a Japanese product made in Savannah, Georgia. But I'm not one of those. I learned early on in my life what Will Rogers said once. If you remember Will Rogers, a cowboy comedian who always twirled a lasso that he couldn't handle very well. He was a humorist. And what he said was, I've never met a man that I didn't like. Said another way, if you get to know someone, the chances are pretty good you're going to like them. The chances are pretty high that you're not going to dislike them once you get to know them. I got to know the Japanese. I was serving in Korea. The logistics conference was being held in Kyoto, Japan, and I was representing the Marine Corps at that conference. At that conference, all the other U.S. forces were there. A number of Japanese corporations involved in shipping and warehousing in Japan were there. And for 3 days, we ate breakfast together, we worked. We had lunch together, we worked. We had dinner together, we worked. And after dinner, we went out and drank that good Japanese beer and ate that good raw fish and loved every minute of it. So I did that for 3 days. And by the time I'm on the airplane heading back for Korea, I say to myself, you know, those guys were just like I was. Just like I am today. When they were on Iwo Jima, they didn't want to be there. I sure as hell didn't want to be there. But our military and political leaders had put us there, and once there, we did what we had to do. But I said to myself, look, we're fighting a war in Korea, but the Japanese are giving us tremendous support, transshipping through Japan into Korea to support our activities. I didn't use the same words as what I'm going to talk to you about in just a minute. But what it was translated to me ultimately is we were enemies who had now become friends, and there was a good reason for it. And in 1995, when we had the first of what is now the Legion of Honor, the widow of General Kurabayashi set the tone. She spoke in old classical Japanese. Most young Japanese on the island couldn't understand what she was saying. What she said was, once enemies, we are now friends. And together, we must not let this kind of warfare happen again. Well, we haven't done too good about that, but that's beyond our control. What we do know is that our former enemies in Japan are now our very close ally. And the bond that exists, mutual security bond between Japan and the United States, is the strongest bilateral relationship in the world today, as Ambassador Mansfield would say, bar none. They are supportive to us in every way. We're supportive of them. We have a friendship arrangement between us now that's going to be important as we stand together in the long term against international terrorism. But you see, some folks can't seem to make that transition from enemies to friends. I made it. It can be done. I commend it to you. If you're troubled by a relationship, talk your way through it. You get off of that guilt trip. Who's got a question? John?
Yeah.
Hold it, John. Let me give you first of all. Oh, sorry about that, John. Hold on a minute.
Thank you very much. As a daughter of a Marine that was on the 5th Division, I have a question for all of you. I did not even know up until about 20 years ago that my father was even on Iwo Jima. I had no idea, and least of all that he was a flamethrower. And my question to all of you is, because I look at all of you as my father, at what point did you start talking to your families about what had happened? And I can say it, it's very emotional. But it's very important for you to talk to your family about this because we had no idea. And it's only by coming here very much at the last minute because of Fred Harvey that I've even learned of the stories of my father at the age of 20. And so my questions to you gentlemen are, do you talk to your families about this? And at what point did you start opening up about it?
That's a very good question, and I want these panelists to raise their hand in a moment. I'm going to take a first shot at it. I've gone through that. And at every meeting I attend with veterans, I tell them, talk to your families. Their answer is pretty consistent. If they've experienced the horrors of close combat on the battlefield, they don't think their families can understand what they're saying. They don't believe that they could walk in their moccasins for 3 days to understand what they mean when they say they were in distress on the battlefield. And many families, I think, really don't want to hear that. They want to know what their fathers and their brothers did, but don't give me the details. And that's fine, because most veterans don't want to give them. Now, you get two veterans together who don't talk to their families, they talk to each other, and the stories go on and on and on and on. And then some of them are really true. The fact is, life is that it's hard to talk to your families because you don't think they can understand what you're saying. Who wants to add a comment? Come.
I didn't start talking about it until I had gone back to Iwo Jima with the general and returned the, they call it memorabilia, I call it some souvenirs that I returned. And when I returned the souvenirs, it seemed to lift something. What happened was a Japanese was crawling towards me, and I blew him away, and he had in his hand, it looked like plastique, maybe dynamite, whatever it was, and it was a wooden mahogany box. It looked like a pencil box, and it was tongue and groove. The wood was beautiful. Later on, when I was in the hospital in Saipan, I opened it up, and inside were 2 beautiful chopsticks and a small gold 14-karat Buddha. And this Japanese soldier was crawling toward me with this in his hand. What he had in mind, I don't know. But it always bothered me, even to this day, that I shot him and didn't give him a chance to maybe surrender. Well, still, he could have had hand grenades in his armpits, who knows. But anyway, that's when I sort of loosened up, when I got rid of that memorabilia and returned it at a ceremony on Iwo Jima.
No, okay. Any comments? Okay. How about enough?
You don't buy high-end
Every veteran has got to decide when's the right time, and his family has to decide that.
Well, we respect you for it.
Say again?
We respect you for it.
Yeah. Okay. Who's up?
John. That's John.
Well. Oh, that's John. Okay, John, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I never forget how glad I am that I was able to get in the Marines. I was 6'7" when I got out of high school, and I determined to get out of high school before I joined. So I asked him in the Marine there if he could get me in the Marine, and sure enough he did. So I was never sorry I got in the Marine. I thank everybody for serving with me. One thing I wanted to say is I want to tell you a little experience I had. I know young, well, he was young, he went down when I was, Japanese that was in school to become a kamikaze pilot. And some way when the war ended, he got out and he got to America, he got education, and he became a real good friend of mine. And here I was afraid that I was going to have to invade Japan. I was concerned about that. And the war ended, I didn't have to. And here I was, a real good friend of what might have been my enemy. And we can do that time after time. And I wanted to say that your effort to get along and to meet with the Japanese and hopefully other people to bring us all together is the biggest hope we have for a better world. And I want to thank you very much.
You're very kind, John. I thank you for that comment. It's called reconciliation. And ultimately, where there are crimes involved between people, ultimately I hope that through rehabilitation, you come to acceptance of others' problems and understanding and can move from hate to love. I want to comment, a couple of you have talked about your getting into the Marine Corps. I'll tell you about mine because I love to talk about it. The day after Pearl Harbor, I went down to the post office in Charlottesville, Virginia, to enlist in the Marine Corps. I was a senior, a fourth-year man, we call him, at the University of Virginia. And the old recruiter in there was a gunnery sergeant, wearing khakis. His shirt was tailored so that all his muscles rippled down the center. He had on leather puttees and the high-top cordon shoes, which I thought were absolutely beautiful. He was the epitome of a Marine poster, Marines who had fought in Nicaragua and other places. He said, "Son, you are a fourth-year student at the university, and I cannot enlist you. You have to wait until the recruiter, the officer recruiter, comes to town, which will be in another week or so." He gave me a blank sheet of paper, just like this, blank. And he said, "Write your name and your phone number, and I'll call you when he's coming to town." So I went over to the desk and very carefully and very diligently wrote my name and put my phone number down. And I handed it back, and the old gunner said, "Son, you are now committed to the Marine Corps. With a blank sheet of paper, I could have been signing on to become the assistant pope. I could have been any number of things, but he said, son, you are now committed to the Marine Corps. Well, because that's what I wanted to do, I didn't fight that problem. And a couple of weeks later, the officer procurement guy came. We call him procurement now, but the officer recruiter came, and I passed his test and passed the physical, and I was the first member of my senior class at the University of Virginia in 1942 to be ordered to active duty because of the war. And it was a close call, but the university was very understanding and finally said, do what the Marine Corps tells you to do. You'll get your degree in June, which I did. But I remember very well that man saying, son, you're committed to the Marine Corps. I wasn't sure what to make about it when I left. Said, I wonder what I really signed. But it was too late. He had my soul now, even if it didn't have my body yet. Who's got a question? Maybe the audience question left. You want to comment? Where's the question there? Huh?
Yes, sir. This question asked about the Japanese fighting man. The physical ability of the Japanese fighting man.
Yeah.
That's all I got out of high school. Let's go 6 weeks.
Yeah. Come on.
Sitting here remembering the gentleman asked about, I think it was, I don't hear very well, about the capabilities of the Japanese fighting man. I'll tell you what I thought. Of course, we all believe in stature they were next to midgets, right? All small, tiny. Well, I don't know how long we were on the island before I see my first dead Jap. And he was big. He was 6'4". He looked like he was 230 pounds. I says, I'm not letting go of this BAR for hand-to-hand combat when I see the size of him. That's how big they were. Well, probably he was the exception.
I think history will tell you that back in 1942, the average Japanese male was smaller than the average Japanese male today. Over time, as they have broadened their diet away from so much rice into other foods, they have gained in height for the average Japanese. And one of my close friends, a Japanese who was ambassador to the United States at one point, and other places, 6'3", weighed about, I guess, 230. He hit a golf ball into tomorrow, straight as an arrow, spoke perfect English, and taught me a great deal about the culture of Japan. But the fact of life is, in those days, they were smaller. Now, it's the fact that the average age of Marines in my company was 18. They were 17, 18, 19. I had a couple of liars who were 16 and got in the Corps by lying very well. The average Japanese defender was 5 years older because many of those troops had fought and had been stationed in Manchuria under tough conditions. So they were tough. They were tough physically. They were tough mentally. But they had to fight under very deplorable conditions once they were on Iwo Jima with all that humidity. As they dug in those tunnels, dug in those caves, they could only work 15 minutes at a time because of the heat and humidity. And they had to have a break and get some water. For 6 months before we arrived, they were all on a half ration of water, a half ration of food, which was predominantly rice. It was a miserable life for the defender on Japanese, but that didn't keep them from fighting valiantly, which they did. Yes, Arm?
How many of you gentlemen suffered nightmares after the war? Today would be called post-traumatic stress. And how long did it take before it ceased?
No problem.
I spent 10 days on Iwo Jima. And there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think of it.
Half of us are still nuts.
Anybody else?
I had a funny experience the other night. You have flashbacks, and I'm not a pill popper. And I'm standing over across this one guy, did you come over? Frank Salato, they're down there, and I'm standing there, I'm talking to Frank, and I said, Frank, Nick, why don't you guys come up, spend 30 days and be able to enjoy life like I did, and have been married and have a great life, but it's only a temporary thing. I'm not going to stay on for more than 30 days. You come back up, and you go back down, I'll come back up. So who knows what that's supposed to mean. But I think that all of us, you hold a lot of things up inside of you. I think we have to tell our kids and let everybody know what's really going on, let it out sometimes. I think they'd appreciate that, and the younger generation, you know, they want three things. They want the best of everything, they don't care what it costs, and they want it now. I mean, they're all good generations. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm going to add my personal response to that. I'm a very lucky man. I have never suffered from nightmares or screaming nights or any reason based on any combat I had in World War II. And I fought again in Korea, and I fought again in Vietnam, and had some terrible experiences. But some of you may have heard me say on the first, yesterday or the day before, whatever it was, that the human mind somehow has a capacity to shut down if it can't accept the horror that it sees. It happened to me. I have some days on Iwo Jima, I can't remember a single thing that I did. I was there, didn't leave. I wasn't relieved for my job, but I don't know what I did. Just don't. I don't want to apologize for that. When I could function with my mind, I was there and did what I was supposed to do. But when I went to a blank, it's blank. Now, I had the dreadful experience, which I know I've shared with several of you, of being down on IJAA and holding in my arms an 18-year-old Marine whose body was torn apart by an artillery or mortar fragment, and his insides were spilling out on the sand. He's got that 1,000-yard stare that looks right through you, and he says, help me. And I say, I'm going to help you. I'm going to get you help. But that's a lie. I couldn't help him. Nobody could help him. God couldn't help him at that stage. My prayer at that moment was, God, take him now. Take him home. Give him relief from what he's experiencing at this moment. And most times God did that. Now, I had that experience not only there, but I experienced it again in Vietnam. I had a couple of instances in Korea. And I think about those things often, but I'm in my full capacity in the daytime or at nighttime, sitting around by myself maybe, that I think about it. But nightmares, no. Bad dreams about it, no. Why? I don't know. But what I do know is, I remember those instances. I try not to think of them too often. I rather put my focus on humorous things, and little things in life that I enjoyed with my troops. But you can't escape some of those memories. They were just too hard, too bitter, and you just can't get by without recalling them. But I like to think, and incidentally, I was wounded by that 362 millimeter mortar, that spigot mortar. And it was constructed badly, frankly, about poor iron and other metals that the Japanese could scrape up. And when it exploded, it went to a zillion pieces. There were not many big fragments, but the zillions of little fragments. And I got a whole flock of those things between my helmet and my collar, in the back of my head and my neck and my hands, which were exposed. I was a bloody mess. But I wasn't hurt very badly. I was just bloody. Well, we don't need to pursue that any further, but I just want to make the point that in some of those instances where you would like to forget what happened to you, you can't. But I have an excuse today when I make mistakes. My health record shows that on the day I was wounded the first time by one of those, and it happened again later, my record shows I suffered a concussion. Now, You've all heard a lot about concussions and post-syndrome about troops in the Middle East. And I sympathize with them, and I'm sorry they are having that problem. But now you see that I know that I had a concussion, I can use it. And if I can't think of something I want to think about, I said, wait a minute, I suffered a concussion, I don't remember that. So it's a very handy position to be in with my health record to say that I suffered a concussion. But really, it hasn't made any difference in my life that I know of. So it's a lame excuse. But after all, I got to do what I got to do. If I need a lame excuse, I'd use it. Who else? Hank? There it is.
Oh, you got it. I'm here.
Okay.
I think everybody here, and I am, we left you in your story on the edge of a foxhole with your friend gone and you're badly wounded. How did you get saved? Would you plead for everybody?
Of the 8-man patrol, those that weren't wounded or dead are missing. There were two that were in one piece. They were about 30 yards away. And they were Jim White, who passed away of natural causes, and Lee Blanchard, who was a colonel in the the Marine Corps, Air Force. We never did consider the Marine Air Force ground troops. I don't know what's down there. But anyway, he became a colonel. They came out of their foxhole and they dragged me back. And Jim White did what he wasn't supposed to do, and Blanchard also. They gave me their bandages and their sulfur drugs. They wrapped them around me and they put tourniquets on my legs to stop the bleeding. And about 4:30 in the morning, a corpsman came and gave me plasma and gave me morphine. To this day, I can understand how somebody becomes a heroin addict, because that morphine just kills the pain, gives you that warm glow, and you just sit there and watch the fellas shooting the Japanese and just relax. The one question people invariably ask me, and I answer it this way. It was asked just now on the podium here. I have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. I have 7 granddaughters and a great-granddaughter. Nobody's adopted. There are no sperm donors. Every problem that I had in that area was solved by the Navy. And one other thing I want to add. I'm probably the only Marine with a Purple Heart who went in the Marines as a private. And when I got discharged, I was a private. And I was a private until Barney Barnum, who has a Medal of Honor, became the Undersecretary of the Navy for the Reserves, and he got me my PFC. George Bush was president.
Thank you very much. Okay, last chance. Any questions for the panel? Yes. Yes, sir.
Thank you. In 5 years ago, 2010, I was here, and when we were at the museum, I walked the trail, and when I got to the Iwo Jima, waiting for the doors to open, and as they were opening, I couldn't move, and my body shook like it's never shaken before. And it hasn't since. But I always felt like anybody's body, whatever you have to do, should do, it'll help you go through that time. Just take it one day at a time, or even 1 hour a day, and go through what you have to do. And that's what I try to do every day that road. Sometimes it's not pretty, but you're just what you have to do, period.
Thank you very much. Good comment. That's what Marines do. Do what we have to do. Well, then you've got the rest of the afternoon off, as far as I know. Is there any administrative details for you?
For those of you who still